Reflections on Politics and Religion. After I began to watch Itchy Boots, the Dutch female biker that travels throughout continents around the world, I came to the realization that Africa was indeed a blessed land. Itchy Boots took a trip through Africa beginning sometimes in July 2023. She entered Africa, she entered the continent from Europe through Morocco. She rode through the Sahara Desert and arrived in Western Africa some months or weeks later. She rode through Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Ghana, until she arrived in Nigeria sometime in December 2023. She came in through Idi-Iroko in Ogun State and headed towards Oyo State, where I live. Her plan was to head to Abuja to get visas to enter the Cameroons and other Central African countries that she planned to pass through during her trip. It was while she was in Oyo State that two policemen stopped her and asked her for money. They were unaware that she was filming the whole episode. She would eventually publish that video and reported to her viewers that policemen in Nigeria were demanding money from her. The Nigerian police saved their face by dismissing those two officers, as if to say that demanding money from people on Nigerian roads were foreign to this country, or is foreign to this country. But that is a digression. Following this Ichi Boots travel log on YouTube, as she through various African countries, showed me that Africa will be the next world frontier. If African countries do not get their acts right, this continent will be colonized again. It is how to avoid this very serious matter that I wish to discuss in this episode that I have titled Reflections on Politics and Religion. I hope to end my reflections today with 4 points that we must do, or 4 things we must do to avoid another colonization of our continent. My name is Deji Yesufu. I am the pastor of Providence Reformed Baptist Church, Ibadan. This is Reformed Niger Television. It's our midweek edition. We're doing something a little away from religion, but still relevant to the matters that concern us. You're welcome to our broadcast today. I want to say thank you for all those who have joined us. Like we normally do, we invite you to leave comments and also questions that has or that relates to our discussion. Again, like I said, I want to do a discussion or a reflection on politics and religion. But for me to be able to do that, I actually want to start with a little story. Okay, so that the whole discussion can be put in a context, a personal story. Sometimes in 2014, I became convinced that I needed to go into Christian ministry. Okay, I needed to up the anthem a little bit. I've been serving the Lord in local churches, but I thought that I needed to do it a little more seriously. A friend of mine who, in fact, I could name his name, Brother Dada, not Paul Dada. I called him Paul, no, Rotimi Dada. This one is Rotimi Dada. Said, okay, you want to do ministry, that's fine, Then he said that he has this uncle who is like an agnostic. And he said that if you really want to share the gospel with people, why don't you go and see this uncle of mine, and share the gospel with him? Perhaps it will change his way of doing things. The man is an engineer, but he's been having some challenges in his family. And my friend thought that if I spoke with him, perhaps that could reform the man. So I went to see this man somewhere in Ibadan. And when I got to the house, I actually planned to spend the whole day with him. And I did spend like practically the whole morning into like 2 p.m. with him. And I met this man with his friend, and he had been expecting me. So he invited me in and we got talking, and he said, okay, you want to do religion now? You want to do ministry? Oh, that's nice. Wanted to know who I was, what I do, I actually explained to him that I was doing ministry part-time. He appreciated that, But there was something I took away from that discussion. The man said that the more enlightened you become, that's what he told me, himself and his friends said, the more enlightened you become, the more you will shelve religion. He said, the more you become enlightened, the more you shelve religion. That the people who imbibe religion, who are running around prayer houses and all of that, are usually illiterate people. So when he said that, I understood where he was coming from, because at least I'm a little enlightened also, but I kept it somewhere, and I couldn't convert the man. I don't know whether what I said to him made any sense, but I spent some 3-4 hours with him, and that was what I got out of my discussion with him. He said that it is unenlightened people that follow religion. People who are enlightened don't follow religion. Of course, with time I've had to trash that mindset, but there's a sense that there's some truth in it. Okay. Now, for me to be able to do some justice to my discussion on reflections on religion and politics, I want to take us a little bit backwards to the 16th century. I'm a Protestant minister, a Reformed minister. So a lot of the Christian tradition that we practice, at least in our local church, is something that is gotten from the reformers. Now, what informed most of the Reformation, or what was the challenge in the mind of Europeans during the Reformation, were essentially two things. The first one was the fear of the unknown, and the second one was ignorance. Fear and ignorance. A lot of people did not know what would befall them after death. And because of that, they found themselves bound to the words and pronouncements of their religious leaders. Okay, so, and then in those days also diseases was rampant, and there were lots of death. And because diseases were rampant and there were lots of death, people die early, and there was this strong fear of death. So there was a strong besides the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, there was also a reliance on religion. Okay, people looked to religion for hope, because if there is little hope on earth, then you look to heaven to save you, and it makes some sense. So they looked to their popes, they looked to their reverend fathers, and so on, to find solution to their challenges. So there were lots of fear and there were lots of ignorance. The ignorance came from the fact that in those days there was no systematic educational system. Okay, if anybody is going to be educated at all, he probably would have to come from a middle class family that will be able to afford to send him to a monastery where the monks would do the teaching. Okay, in those days, in fact, that's where the whole university system came from. Okay, monasteries, certain monasteries were probably good for the arts, some for history, some for mathematics, and so on. And then ultimately they began to see that, okay, if they could bring all of this religious system all of these religious systems together, okay, they could form a university. All right, but that's where the university system came from, the learning at monasteries. Okay, so ignorance was rampant, fear was everywhere. Okay, however, there was something that God did through providence, through a man called Martin Luther, a German, okay, in the early parts of the 16th century. Martin Luther was born to a middle-class family. His father I think he must have been a lawyer or something, but he was wealthy, doing very well. So he could afford to send his child to school from an early age. Okay, and he wanted Luther to become a lawyer. But Luther at some point had this encounter, with lightning, and he said that if St. Anne could save him, he was going to become a monk. And he kept his vow and went into the monastery. Okay, so while he was in the monastery, he had some senior, the monastery he joined was a monastery that had Augustinian bent. Okay, so some of his leaders there saw that he was quite voracious and he loved to learn. Okay, so what they did was that they exposed him to a lot of learning, a lot of teaching, and but in fact, before 1517, when he nailed the 95 thesis to the wall, he had gotten his PhD. Okay, so, and that he was born 1483. Yeah, 14, just 17 plus another 17, that's 34. So before 35, he already had his PhD, so he was very, very bright. Okay, so he had one thing. Luther had education. Okay, so Luther was not he was not suffering from one of the major problems of the people in 16th century Europe, which was ignorance. He had an education. Okay, and when your mind is educated, one of the first thing that goes is the fear of unknown. That's the first thing that goes. That in fact it was one of the things I saw in those two men when I went to evangelize them. They had, because they were enlightened men, they had very little fear of what will befall them after death. They believed that they were agnostics. They believed that there was no God anywhere. The same way we came from oblivion, okay, and total unconsciousness, into this life, is the same way we'll go after we are gone. We'll just go poof like any other animal, But so they had very little fear. So there's a connection between education and fear. Okay, if your mind is enlightened, you have a tendency where fear of superstition and all of those things go out of the window. So Luther had that blessing. Okay, and then it also helped him to be able to bring about the Reformation in his time, even though he didn't go out to reform Europe or reform religion in Europe, but his writing and his utterances ultimately brought the Reformation. Okay. Now I write here, as the mind gets enlightened, so also does fear erode away, such that the ordinary man could challenge both political and religious authorities. Okay, so now one of the things that happened in the days even of Luther was that the people themselves began to read. Luther encouraged them to read the Bible in vernacular. He translated the New Testament Greek to German. Okay, and he encouraged the ordinary people to read. So there was enlightenment, and people were becoming educated. And the first thing, one of the major first things that happened, okay, in the days of Luther was that there was a peasant revolt. Okay, and the ordinary people said that they wanted better governance. They didn't want this being bound to religious authority and all of those. So there was a revolt, and it became really bad because they were not very well coordinated. So there was violence, and because there was violence and they were not properly coordinated, even though Luther supported them at first, later he turned against them and wrote against them. And the rulers of Germany in those days, they crushed the peasant revolt. Okay, so that if you go to Germany today, the western part of Germany remains predominantly Lutheran, and then the eastern part is predominantly Roman Catholic, because the eastern part decided to break away from Lutheranism and they returned back to Roman Catholicism. But that's another thing. The first thing that enlightenment does is that it free people from fear, and they're able to face whatever is challenging them. Okay, so that happened even in the days of Luther. Okay, now there's a scripture here that I want to read from the book of Daniel, chapter 4, verse 1 to 4. I want to quote a scripture that is quite popular, but we have a comment here, I think, from somebody. I want to say, all right, Adebi Tunde says, what are you going about? Imagine. All right, so I don't know what that means. Please, if you have something else to say, you can. Okay, so Adebi Tunde says, well done. All right, thank you very much for your comment. Okay, so I'm just going to go and read the text of Daniel chapter 4. I'm going to read from verse 1 to verse 4. Reads, and I quote, at that time, Michael shall stand up, that's verse 1, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and that shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness, like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So that's where I'm going to really, the book of Daniel is like a replica of the book of Revelation. Okay, so what happened in Daniel basically was that God gave Daniel visions of the things that were to come, and in fact, chapter 1, I think that's chapter 1, there was that vision that Daniel saw and he interpreted to King Nebuchadnezzar, and talked about that after the Babylonian kingdom, there is going to be the Greek kingdom. And after that, there's no the Persian kingdom. After that, there's going to be the Greek kingdom. And then finally, there's going to be the Roman kingdom. But the Bible is saying, I believe this is the angel speaking to Daniel. It said, but you, Daniel, shut up these words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Now, it is this knowledge increase that I want to talk about before I eventually, plateau with regards to the things happening in Africa and the reason why we must utilize knowledge to improve our lot, so that the evil that I sense could happen to us doesn't happen. And that is the colonization of Africa again. Okay, so European ages, Europeans divide their time into various other continents, have the way they divide their time. But the Europeans divide their time, the Bronze Age, they regard it as 3000 BC, that's 3000 years before Christ, up to 1050 BC. That was a period in time when there was enough enlightenment, but around, the use of bronze and all of that. Then we come to the Iron Age, which is 1050 to 500 500 BC. Now we're coming into biblical times, because the days of Abraham must have been like 4,000 years before Christ, or 3,000 or 2,000. I'm not very sure. Okay, I think it's 2,000. Okay, and so on and so forth. The days of David should be 1,000 years before Christ. Ezra and so on will be 450 years before Christ. Okay, so the Iron Age is 1050 to 500 BC. Okay, now there this age they call the Middle Ages. Okay, those ages are 476 AD to 1453. Those are the Middle Ages. A lot happened in the Middle Ages we can't even go into right now. But in 1453, that was about the time of the invention of the printing press, okay, where writing, handwriting was translated into printing from. So what happened with the printing press was that it revolutionized writing. It means that, knowledge could be easily easily replicated, and then people could have access to books at at lower rates, okay, and they could become enlightened. So getting an education was a lot cheaper from the late 15th century onwards, okay. So from the late 15th century to 1453 to 1789, 1789 is the beginning of the French Revolution, okay, that brought an end to the monarchy in France and also began to make countries question the whole idea of one man ruling, and bringing about the science of government. I've written about the science of government. If you want to learn more about it, please check my website, textandpublishing.com. Okay, I wrote about science of government when I examined the Kemi Badenoch and what she's doing in London. Okay, so the Renaissance is the period, the days of Luther between 15th century to 16th century. During the Renaissance, there was a revolution of the arts. Okay, there were a lot of countries around Europe, began to pay attention to the arts and to so many things around the arts. There was also humanist ideas that were going around where there was a commitment to the human being and to make the human being a better person. Okay, besides that, there was also the beginning of the sciences and so on and so forth. Those are the days that led on to the 17th century when we had theories postulated by people like Isaac Newton that formed the basis of physics. Okay, the Protestant Reformation, we've talked about it, came in the 16th century. The Protestant Reformation was also a result of the Renaissance because people like Luther and others had materials to read, and they could read those materials, even if they read it in a foreign language, but at least they had materials to read. What will happen in those days was that if you want to read materials, okay, if you're German, you need to read materials, you have to learn Latin, you have to learn Greek, okay, and they were able to read those materials in their original languages, and they were enlightened, okay. So that's what led to the Protestant Reformation. In fact, two men led the Protestant Reformation in those days. Was Martin Luther, there was Ulrich Zwingli, and the two of them, Luther was living in Germany, Zwingli was living in a city in Munich, Switzerland, and the two of them independently came to Protestant convictions at the same time. The doctrine of justification by faith at the same time, and it was all because they had access to read materials that they could read. Okay, so we're looking at different ages. We've looked at the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Middle Ages. Now we're in the early modern period between 1453 and 1789. Okay, the earliest of them is the Renaissance period, where there was the revolution in arts and sciences and humanism. Okay, and then the Protestant Reformation, and then the 16th century to the 18th century, we had something called the Industrial Revolution. Okay, because when with the discoveries in physics and so on, inventions began to, so that there was the invention of the electric motor, the invention of the generator. Okay, ultimately there was the invention of electricity, and all of those affected production. Okay, at the basis of all of this, do not forget, is learning. Okay, knowledge increasing, and people increasing in, their minds expanding and being able to do more and more. And rather than being caged with superstitious fear, they were released to do so much. And in fact, what they used to do, even till now, what people do is that they build upon knowledge. Okay, the previous knowledge, people come and they build upon it, and they build upon it, and they build upon it. In the 18th century, we had something called the Enlightenment that was led by people, the writings of men like Voltaire in France and so on. It was the Enlightenment that led people to begin to question the authority of the monarchy in France and also the authority of religious institution, which led to the French Revolution, okay, and a whole destabilizing of Europe in those days, but the French, insisted that they needed to pursue their revolution, and they pursued it to a logical end, so that today France does not have a monarchy. What they have is a democracy, even though, okay, I will still get to this thing. There's also another big challenge, and that is that the Enlightenment brought something called liberalism, okay? And liberalism actually means that people did not build their life around religious tenets, okay? People taught, while the religious tenets could form their fundamental values, but they also taught deeper and further than what the Bible or other religious books were saying, okay? But what the liberals, and that's what the liberals did. The liberals believe that you could do a lot more beyond religion, okay? The only problem with liberalism is that every kind of progressive thought will tend to move from one point to the other, okay? It could either move from something good to something better, or it could go from something good to something worse. Okay, and what's happening in the West, in Europe and America today, is that they are moving away from their liberal foundations, and they are going to extreme left positions. Okay, so that many liberals today will find themselves on the right, and then the positions that are being championed by many people in the West today is on the extreme left. And when I talk about extreme left, I'm talking about people who jettison religion completely. Many liberals do, it's just that some are also still religious, okay, but the left completely jettison religion, okay. They begin to espouse doctrines around all this same-sex thing and so on and so forth. Okay, but hopefully, we are hoping, some of us who are on the right are hoping that with the election of Donald Trump, there will be a restoration of at least common sense in the way people espouse their ideology. Okay, so today in my discussion, I'm looking at reflections on politics and religion. But before I go any further, I want to invite you to please join me as we celebrate Lakim Investment. They are the gentlemen, the people who are sponsoring our production. Okay, so they're the ones that have made it possible for us to come on live. Okay, so Lakim Investment is a short-lived facility. They have a short-lived facility in Ikorodu, Lagos. If you want to patronize them, please, on our behalf, do patronize them. If you need a place to stay in Ikorodu, maybe you're visiting Lagos, either the island or Ikorodu itself, need a place to stay, please patronize Lakim Investment. Get in touch with them. There's a number there. Get in touch with them and do business with them on our behalf. So I want to appeal to us to please patronize Lakim Investment. They are the ones that continue to keep us to stay online. Again, I want to say thank you for those who have joined us. If you have comments, please send them. If you have questions, please post them, and I will try to attend to them as we go on. All right. So we started by one of the scriptures that we looked at was scripture in Daniel 12, verse 1 to 4. Okay, and the Bible did tell, one of the prophecies God gave through Daniel was that learning was going to increase in the last day. Now, what has learning resulted in the modern world? Okay, the first thing, there are so many things, of course, so many things, but one of the things I want us to explore is that number one, learning led to people to able to invent things. Okay, and even in the days of Paul, in the days of Jesus, there were ships. You know, with the industrial revolution, the invention of the use of electricity and so on. Okay, they could build better navigating equipment around the world on seas. Okay, so one of the first things that especially the Europeans and the British particularly did was that they began to explore the world through ships. Okay, in the 16th century, the New World were discovered, which led to the discovery of the Americas. Okay, subsequently they discovered Africa. Okay, and just as they found that America was a very livable space, they also found Africa to be a very livable space with lots of resources and all of that. And of course, the whole idea of colonizing Africa, just as they colonized America, began to play in their head. But education led them first to discover what? The ships, which were able to navigate the world. Okay, the second thing that education led people to do was I led them to be able to build weaponry, weapons for warfare. Okay, with weapons, and ability to go around the world with their ships, they were able to subjugate nations and subjugate their enemies. All right, that's one of the things. Another thing that education led to, it led them to be able to build weapons. Okay, so that while some people were using bow and arrow and using spears, these people were using bullets, gunpowders and all of that. Okay, and as learning increased, okay, as um what they call it, ability to move around increase, as weapons increase, what it naturally led to was the colonization of nations. Okay, I've talked about the colonization of America. Okay, the Americans got their independence towards the end of the 18th century. Okay, and it's as if the moment they lost America, they moved to other parts of the world. They moved to Asia, to India, to Africa. That's the British, and they began to try to colonize those places. Okay, now interestingly, there's something about British history that is very interesting. In 1833, uh, slavery was declared illegal in Britain. That was in 1833. It was a culmination of the campaign of men like William Wilberforce and others, as they tried as much as possible to help the English people appreciate the fact that they could not be using men made in the image of God as slaves. Okay, it doesn't matter the profit they were trying to get out of it. They argued that at Parliament, and they were able to pass it into law. And slavery came to an end officially in 1833. The British didn't only end slavery, they began to move all around the world to teach the concept of an end to slavery to everybody. Okay, and then they also put their ships on the high seas, because they were in fact, for a long time in the 19th century, the British were the strongest naval countries, and they put their ships on the high seas, and on oceans, and they were monitoring slave trading routes, and any ship they found with slaves, they captured the ship, they arrested the people in charge, and they returned the slaves. Okay, that was, I think, what led to the formation of Freetown in Liberia, where they took slaves and they dumped them. Okay, and then that was how our own Bishop Ajayi Crowther, who had been captured as slave and was being taken to the Americas, was discovered by the British, and they took him back to Freetown. I believe that should be Senegal. Yeah, that should be Senegal, where he was educated. He became a minister, and then he was sent to Nigeria to evangelize the people of Nigeria. And it was when he was sent back, he traced his roots, which was Oyo, and his mother was still alive. In fact, that's another story entirely. Okay, so the British helped to end slavery. This ended it officially in 1833, and they began, the Americans did not end slaves immediately, even though there were lots of debates around it. In America, the northern parts of America, which was a lot liberal, had accepted an end to slavery. Okay, the southern part, which was religious and Calvinist, okay, were still entertaining slaves and using slaves. And sometimes in the 1860s, America went to a civil war over the subject of slavery. Okay, and lots of people were killed. At the end of the day, the northern part, which was the more liberal part, okay, defeated the the religious part, and they brought an end to slavery. That happened with Abraham Lincoln. Okay, now the British, who ended slavery, now decided to do another kind of slavery. Human mind is very wicked. Okay, one would think that if you end slavery, then you will, do the right thing. Okay, yeah. So they ended slavery, but they now began colonization. Okay, and what they did was that they didn't go into the nations to go and colonize them straight away. Okay, what they did was that they sent their men, who will usually come and buy raw materials from the people, in the land. And then there were some companies in Nigeria. There was the Royal Niger Company that was into this, and that the British gave them soldiers, okay, who protected their men to be able to help to get the resources. But subsequently, by 1900, the Royal Niger Company handed over the nation of Nigeria, both the northern and the southern part. They handed it them over to the British. So the formal colonization of Nigeria began with the British. I think the idea in the minds of the British then was that Britain is very cold, the weather is very harsh, and they really wanted to turn Nigeria, especially the Lagos area and the western part of Nigeria, into a mini London, okay, because of the weather, so they invested a lot into building Nigeria and helping Nigeria to become a country, okay, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, because of the high-handedness of the many British officials, and with the way they were going about the colonization of Nigeria, Nigerians, a lot of them were becoming resentful, of British rule, and there was a campaign for self-rule. Now, if Nigerians alone had been campaigning for self-rule, even if all Africans were campaigning for self-rule, that in itself would never have led to the independence of Nigeria. There had to be other factors. And one of the factors that was playing around in the early 20th century was that first there was a destructive war, okay, in 1914 to 1918, which was the First World War, okay, that led to the killing of many British men. Okay, then there was a Second World War from 1939 to 1945, so that by the end of the First and the Second World War, some 1 million able-bodied British men had died. Okay, so with the loss of men and the loss of resources, because lots of money was spent to prosecute that war, the British public began to campaign for an end to colonization. Because you see, the colonies were not just places where the British were getting things from. The British were also investing in these colonies. Okay, one of the things that we know clearly they invested in, number one, was that they were building networks of rail all around Nigeria, and we still have many of them even existing today, okay, and roads and so on and so forth. They were investing mightily with the hope that they could have a country they could actually call their own, okay, just like they had with America, But the British public felt that those investments were a waste of resources, okay. Many people were also coming to the logical conclusion that if our fathers had ended slavery, why are we carrying out slavery in another context? Okay, so while the British public were campaigning, the British are they're very, very democratic. The system of government they have is run by the people. The people elect their leaders into parliament to lead them. Okay, and when they elect them, then the leaders now go to the king and submit themselves and say, we are ruling the country on behalf of the king. Okay, so Britain, or England particularly, is actually ruled by the monarchy, but on behalf of the monarchy, they have elected officials, okay, who are elected into parliament. That is another matter. So the people were insisting that there must be an end to colonialism, okay, and they demanded an end. But as they were doing that, many African sons and daughters were getting educated, and they were showing themselves able to handle government issues, okay? And there's a particular African son that I want to quote here. Now, Obafemi Awolowo is said in one of his writings, I can't remember which book now. I think it was in his book Awo. Okay, he said two things led to the end of colonization. Number one, the campaign for self-rule by educated Africans and Nigerians. And number two, liberalism in Britain and the two great wars, particularly liberalism, okay, in Britain. All right, so that in 1960, the British now granted Nigeria independence. All right, and they said, okay, go and rule yourself. In spite of all our investment, we're withdrawing, okay, they left all their investment and they return back home. Go and rule yourself. Now, I leave it to you to decide how well we have governed ourselves in the past 65 years. Okay, I leave that to you. But I have and this is what really led to this video. Okay, I have a certain fear. Okay, and that fear is this: that there is a new colonialism coming from China and Russia, and is being imposed on Africa. Now, so far, the ideas that have ruled Nigeria, because this country was formed by the British, and there was no Nigeria. All of our countries, most of our people were disjointed people, different ethnic groups living in different spaces. Okay, it was the British that brought all of us together and created something called Nigeria. In fact, the name Nigeria was given to us by a woman. She's a she's a journalist, and she was also the mistress or wife to either Lord Lugard or one of those, So she just gave that name Nigeria, and that was how the name stuck. So there was nothing like Nigeria before. Okay, the British created this country, and they created this country on certain principles. Number one, liberal democracy. They created this country upon, basically, Christian worldview and so on and so forth. Now, what is happening is that we are finding ourselves little by little because of bad governance and having not used our resources wisely. We're finding ourselves little by little being enslaved to two countries, and those countries are Russia and China. Okay, I can't go into the details of it now, but my biggest challenge with that matter or that issue is this: that Russia and China do not share the same ideas as the West. Okay. Russia is not a democracy. China is not a democracy. Okay. They do not believe in liberty of thoughts. They do not believe in freedom of speech. Okay. They are an autocracy of another kind. All right. If you remember what used to happen in the days of the monarchy, especially the one that the French pulled down, it was a situation where the king was like our Anglican friends would say of the bishop. He was an akpashewa. Whatever he said stood. Okay, nobody questioned the king. So it was, the end of the monarchy and the birth of liberal democracy that that led to freedom of thought, freedom of speech. What I'm saying now, what I'm doing right now is some kind of liberalism. I do not have to be under anybody to be able to share my thoughts. I just share my thought outside, and anybody who thinks what I'm saying makes some sense would believe or take onto my ideology. But China and Russia don't share these ideas. Okay, and China is making heavy investment in Africa. It's making both through loans and through investment and so on and so forth. And many people have been afraid and been saying that if African nations cannot or end up not being able to pay back these loans, they may end up being colonized little by little by the Chinese. Okay. And the way they will do it is very simple, like they were doing with our train system. And I think they're still doing it now. They put in money into an aspect of your national life. If they are not getting their resources the way getting profit out of their investment, they come to your land and they begin to run that system themselves. Okay, the same way they are running the railway, because we cannot run it. They'll go on to run the public transport system. They'll go on to run this. They'll go on to run that. God forbid they take over our television, and before you know it, they may begin to sit in our seat of government, dictating to us how we work, because we are unable to govern ourselves. Now, again, these two countries are not liberal democracies. They do not allow for freedom of thought and for freedom of expression. Okay, and if those things are taken away from a people, you no longer have the underlying basis on which this country was formed. And this country then begins to become something else. In fact, we become what? Colonized again. Okay. So when I started my speech, I said that those were my fears, that this country can be colonized again. Why? Because we are unable to govern ourselves. You to look at it. Except you think we're doing a good job with it, fine. But if not, we may end up finding ourselves in the hands of wrong people. Okay, now this is what I think is going to lead, or this is the way I think we can avoid these dangers. And I'm going to list 4 of them and then bring this discussion to a close. The first one is that we must rediscover what were the um, basis, the biblical basis that formed our country. Okay, the biblical, the Christ-like basis that formed our worldview. Okay, because whether the West like it or not, and they accept it, and they're accepting it more and more today, their countries were founded on Christian worldview. Okay, and I'm going to read something out which I saw while I was preaching in church on Sunday. I'm going to read that out and use that to make my point. Okay, I'm going to be reading from the book of John. I'm going to read from verse 5 to verse 10. Now, this is Jesus about to leave the disciples, and he left a principle, which I think is one of the fundamental principles that has made our societies workable. Okay, and this is the principle. Jesus says, or it reads, after that, Jesus poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Verse 7, Jesus answered and said unto him, what I do that thou knowest not, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter said unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter said unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Verse 10, Jesus said to him, he that is washed needed not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit. For you are clean, but not all of you. But you are clean. Now, what is Jesus saying here? Jesus is leaving an example for his disciples and talking about servant leadership. Okay, the founding principle of our society has been servant leadership. Okay, that's why we call our the people who work in our government, we call them civil servants. They are serving the people. Servant leadership has been the founding principle. What led to the French Revolution? The French Revolution was brought about because they realized that their kings were autocratic. They were not servants. They were not serving the people. So they elected government officials that will serve the people. Why do people have problems with Kemi Badenoch of the United Kingdom today? Is because she's serving the people who brought her into government. Okay, she's a servant. All right, she's trying to serve them, and she's listening to them and trying to bring into government policies that will help the people that are appointed as she's a servant. Okay, the very moment we lose the principle of service or servanthood, okay, anywhere, we begin to do something that Christ has not sent us to do. Okay, and in the French Revolution, when the people revolted against the king, they revolted not just against the king, they revolted also against the religious institution. Many of the churches in those days, they were predominantly Roman Catholic. France was closed to the Protestant Revolution for a long time, so the country remained predominantly Roman Catholic. But by the end of the 18th century, the people were tired of even the religious class, okay, because they saw that the Reverend Fathers and the religious, they were the ones that had the biggest houses, they owned the biggest monasteries, they owned all the lands and all of that. So the people revolted against these people, okay. And what exactly were they revolting against? They were revolting against the spirit of servanthood that the churches ought to have, okay. If there is anything that I have revolted against in my writing and in my teaching, has been that tendency of autocracy in churches. Okay, when I started the the campaign against tithing, okay, it was still the same thing. I didn't say people could not tithe. My point was that nobody has a right to command anybody to bring 10% of anything. Okay, the Bible does not command it. If people are convinced they needed to give money to church, let them do it of their free volition. But you have no right to command anybody to do anybody. You are not that person's Lord. You are not that person's father or mother. Even their father and mother dare not do the same. Okay, so the minute the churches begin to lose this spirit of servant leadership, the people revolted. The minute the government began to lose the spirit of servant leadership, the people revolted. So I leave it to you now to decide, do we have servant leadership in Nigeria? Okay, the second thing that must happen, okay, as we build on this principle of servanthood, all right, because even what I'm doing now is servanthood. Okay, I'm serving my community, I'm serving the people who watch me and trying to give them information. We must not lose that worldview of servanthood. All right, the leadership that Vladimir Putin provides for Russia is not servanthood. All right, it's autocracy. The leadership that Xi Jinping or whatever his name is in China is not servanthood, it's autocracy. The minute you lose the spirit of servanthood anywhere, either in church or in the government, okay, you're doing something other than a Christian worldview. All right. Now, the second thing that must happen for us to evade a possible second colonization of Africa is that we must educate our young people. We must education. We must invest in education. Now, I am not going to begin to talk to government, all right, because free education, especially in the southwest Nigeria and all over the place, has become a farce. Okay, anywhere you put your child, anywhere you find free education today, please run away from it, because because people think because it is free, then they don't. They don't put the best into it. All right. So many of us, well, I didn't go for free education. My parents sent me to a private school. I can't send my children to government schools that provide free education because it's a farce and I don't need to go into it. Okay. But we must educate our young people in the sense that every opportunity we have, we must provide education. Okay. To the young people, to the young people we meet on the streets, to the young people we meet in the churches, anywhere you find young people, you must educate their minds. Why? Because the future of the country is our young people. Okay, and if our young people are not bright, if they do not understand governance, okay, if they don't understand why we have a country, okay, people will come, they will sell them peanuts and they will take over their country from them when we are long gone. So we must educate our young people. All right. Now, it doesn't matter what the APC or the PDP is doing today. Okay. With time, all of these people will erode away. I can assure you, many of them are not going to live beyond 100. Okay. They will erode away. By the time they are getting to their 80s, they're going to be useless. They will leave politics. Okay. The young people will eventually get to the seat of power. But if they do not have anything within them, if they are not enlightened, if they do not know what people should use political power for, they will do other things. All right. So, first of all, the spirit of servanthood must not be lost both in our political systems and in our religious organizations. Secondly, we must educate our young people. Thirdly, sound religion will influence society with righteous principles and right judgment. Okay, then we now begin to not just educating our people or having what they call it servant leadership. We now begin to bring religious principles even to our world. And what it does is that everybody finds himself making the right decision. Okay, you are able to see right and see wrong, and you're able to separate yourself from wrong and do right. I did a video once where I said that, and I still believe that what education does is that education helps you to be able to make right decisions, to choose the right and stay away from the wrong. Okay, the missionaries invested in education, educating the young people, because they realize that with an educated mind, an enlightened mind, people will have ability to do the right thing. But not just do the right thing, also make right judgment. Okay, you're able to make the right judgment. What that means is that if there is a conflict, you don't make judgment based on pecuniary reasons. Okay, you don't judge the strong against the weak, or the rich against the poor. Okay, you make right judgment. All right. In fact, one of the things that the British did for Nigeria was that they gave us the law. They gave us law system, so that they brought an end to incessant conflicts in Africa and in Nigeria. Okay, by helping people to realize that they could bring their disagreement before a judge. Okay, argue their case, and then a judge will make the right judgment. Unfortunately, I can assure you that the very moment the British went, they went away with their sense of right judgment. Because in 1962, Nigeria found itself with Obafemi Awolowo being pitched against SLA Akintola, and a Nigerian court ruled in favor of Akintola. But by the time it got to the Privy Council, the Privy Council ruled in favor of Awolowo. The government was supposed to respect the Privy Council. They respected, they brought an end. They said, from now on, we will no longer submit to the Privy Council because we're now an independent country. And from that day, justice died in Nigeria. You can go and ask Dele Farutimi the rest of the discussion. Now, let me end with this thought. Politics and religion need not be enemies. They actually should be complementary. Okay? The people who practice politics are human beings. They are men. Okay? Now, if those men are righteous men, if the founding principles, if their worldview are biblical worldview, okay, they can come into the political sphere. They can serve the people. All right. If not, we're going to have autocrats in government. We're going to have something people call democracy, when in essence, it is not democracy. Okay. Why am I saying all of this? We must do something, and do it very quickly, with regards to what is happening to Nigeria. If we do not do it, one day we're going to wake up and we're going to find out that Africa has been recolonized. Okay, why? Because Europe, Russia, those countries they have terrible weather. Okay, and this place, the weather is excellent. We have all kinds of resources. What we lack is just the ability to utilize what we have. Okay, my name is Deji Yesufu. I wanted to do a reflection on religion and politics, and I trust God that I've been able to do that. My book, Humanity, actually centers on the same theme. I spent one half of the book is talking about politics, the other half is talking about religion, but using religion to influence politics. All right, okay, please don't forget the four principles, especially the first two. Number one, we must not lose the biblical principle of servanthood, serving people. Okay, and then secondly, we must educate both ourselves and our young people. Why? Because the future of the country lies in their hands. On Friday at 8:30 p.m., we're going to have a debate, the second part of our debate between our Muslim friend Abu, Muritala Abu, and then the Reverend Father, Father Imbaeri, on Friday 8:30. Please join us. If you have not subscribed to our channel, please, I want to plead with you that you should subscribe to our channel on YouTube, share our video, and please join us again. We try to broadcast either on Tuesdays and Fridays, or Wednesdays and Saturday, as the case might be. If you're just joining us, I want to ask that as I end the broadcast, please watch the video again and share it with your neighbor. Thank you very much, and we pray that the Lord will bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Bye-bye.